All right, welcome to this digital interview with a man who's been a very strong advocate of friendship between India and Pakistan. He's had a ringside view of both the ups and the downs of the India-Pakistan relationship for a number of years. Ambassador Husain Haqqani has been Pakistan's ambassador formerly to the United States, to Sri Lanka, and before that he was a journalist as well. So welcome to this digital-only interview. I want to say this to our viewers that we're going live on Facebook Live, and this is, I think, the future of television journalism. There's no cameras, there's no OB vans. It's all happening live on the internet. So welcome to News 18, and welcome to this program, Ambassador Haqqani. Your new book, your latest book, which has the cover of a scorecard, and it says India versus Pakistan. Why can't we just be friends? Do you really believe? I mean, after having got a ringside view of the relationship and the highs and lows of it, do you really believe, in your lifetime at least, we can actually be friends? Or the best case scenario, as young people these days say, a very famous phrase, frenemies. Are we consigned to just being frenemies?
If you had asked a Frenchman this question in 1945 about France's relationship with Germany, I doubt if you would have got the answer in the affirmative. Sure. They would have said, not in our lifetime. And yet we saw a transformation. A militarily exhausted and beaten Germany realized that its future lies in normal relations with France. Not only normal relations, a level of economic integration that has brought us to a pass where both countries have the same currency. They have open borders, and they have completely integrated markets. I think economics will drive India and Pakistan together. Okay. Basically, India needs access to Central Asia. Pakistan will be the route. Middle Eastern oil and gas will have to come to India as India grows through pipelines. Pakistan will not be able to sustain its so-called eternal competition with India because Pakistan's economy is growing much slower than India's, and even if it did grow faster, it will certainly not be able to catch up because a much larger economy is growing. So I think that my desire, though not necessarily my prediction, of good relations between India and Pakistan materializing is based on a tremendous knowledge of history, of global circumstances, and harsh realities, which, while they are not being realized on both sides of the border today, will eventually have to be realized.
But tell me something, you talked about France and Germany, and this is 1945, and just a couple of years after that, both India and Pakistan became independent nations. We've tried for 70 years.
Actually, we haven't. My argument would be that we have never really tried. When Pakistan became independent, or partition occurred, basically both sides were involved in a political argument between two political parties, the Muslim League representing one perspective and the Indian National Congress representing another. For the last 69 years, what we have seen essentially is a kind of a internal politics of the same nature. Point scoring, yes, we are being nice to one another, but deep down not wanting to be nice. On the Pakistani side, Pakistan inherited a much larger army than it inherited economic resources. So the army became a dominant institution, so it needed to fuel conflict for its own institutional survival. Okay. And if you think about it, we have 5,000 years of shared history and only 69 years of partition. So we have never really tried. Gandhiji had suggested, and I've written that in my new book, India versus Pakistan, he had suggested that Indians should treat Pakistan like a family would treat a member of the family who wants to leave the joint family home and set up his own home, and treat them nicely so that they remain members of the family. Well, India didn't do that with Pakistan. Even right at the beginning, when it came to distribution of assets, India didn't do it nicely. On the Pakistani side, the idea of Pakistan rested on a slogan, Islam in danger, or Muslims in danger. After independence, the elite decided to keep that same sentiment alive by creating the attitude of Pakistan in danger. Create fear amongst your people that our country is going to be finished off if we don't fight back.
But tell me something. I mean, that same fear is a reality for us here in India as well. I mean, if you look at the the terrorist attacks, whether it's 26/11, whether it's Pathankot, and when people like Hafiz Saeed, who India believes was the mastermind of these attacks, is roaming free and is actually patronized by the state in Pakistan. I mean, until you address that,
obviously,
can you really move forward?
Absolutely. And I know you will find no stronger advocate of addressing those issues than myself. I think Hafiz Saeed should be locked up, not for the sake of India, but for the sake of Pakistan. I've said this many, many times. The terrorists will not advance any cause for Pakistan. It was an error of judgment. It was a big mistake to get involved in this whole terrorist enterprise. We have been in this business since 1979 when the Jihad against the Soviets was started in Afghanistan. But look, the new fighters are not from the generation that fought the Soviets. They are much younger people. So obviously the jihadi producing factory has been sustained. We need to shut it down. But it's not about the mechanics. It's about the goal. And I think the goal on both sides should be to try and understand how we get there.
Do you reckon, I mean, since you mentioned the Jihad factory and so on, and you mentioned this in your book as well, where General Musharraf, when he was president, very candidly in a meeting of editors said that he looks at the Lashkar-e-Taiba as some kind of a reserve force to take on India. If that is the thinking in the military establishment, then really how can we move forward?
Well, we won't be able to move forward with that thinking, but my bet is that thinking will have to change under the force of circumstances. Pakistan's ability to inflict damage on India through terrorism has become less and less effective. Similarly, I mean, while the anger has risen on the Indian side as a result of terrorism, the fact is that since 26/11 you haven't had a terrorist attack of that scale, which is a positive thing. You have improved your guards, you've raised your guards. That's what happens everywhere. People like myself are being heard more in Pakistan with all the disadvantages that I have of having to live abroad. There are many people in Pakistan who say the same thing. Hafiz Saeed has serious competition for hearts and minds in Pakistan.
No, but
the Pakistani establishment can support him all they like. But just as the Stasi, which was the controlling intelligence service in East Germany, could not keep the East German people down, the KGB could not keep the Russian people down, eventually the Pakistani people's yearning for a better life will prevail. It won't happen tomorrow, and I warn about that in my book. Some people call it a very pessimistic take. I don't think that any big gesture is going to win over the other side. I don't think holding of hands between prime ministers is more than a photo op. It is going to be a slow process, but that process is an inevitable process. The anger is more temporary. My fear is that some people will drive the anger to a level where when the opportunity presents itself, the cooling down may not be quick enough.
Yeah. So in that light, how do you see this outreach by Mr. Modi? I mean, we had a temporary freeze of sorts after August 2014 when India said no talking to the Hurriyat, and it called off the foreign secretary level talks. And then in 2015 they met in Ufa, and then subsequently there was a bit of an engagement that happened, culminating of course with Mr. Modi's own personal initiative to drop by Lahore.
So my critique is that these are not substantive moves. They are all symbolic moves. They are driven by the fact that we now live in a 24/7 media environment. And the media pays far more attention to events than it does to processes. So for example, I don't know if you've ever fallen in love, but falling in love is actually a process. So even though in the movies they always sort of have the lights and everything go off, or in cartoons, the fireworks start the moment two people meet each other, that's not how real life works. So basically, till the fundamental issues begin to be addressed, like terrorism on the Pakistani side, and on India's side, India also needs to sort of work longer term in reassuring the people of Pakistan, not the elite and the establishment of Pakistan, but the people of Pakistan, that the intentions are good and longer term. We will continue to have these so-called breakthroughs followed by real breakdowns. I am advising engagement without illusions, because that's what neighbors do. But at the same time, a waiting for the critical transformation in Pakistan that is absolutely necessary. And on the Indian side's calming tempers down sufficiently so that when that transformation does take place in Pakistan, Indians can seize the opportunity. A bit like what the Americans did in case of the Soviet Union. They understood that they were dealing with a dysfunctional state. They understood that there were people in the Soviet Union who actually wanted to embrace modernity.
Yeah.
And then when the opportunity presented itself, there was room for moving forward.
Okay.
Again, even after you've moved forward, these entrenched interests do fight back. But by and large, the Russia-American relationship today is nothing comparable to what happened during the Cold War.
No, which is why I keep coming back to that idea, in certainly within a large section of the military establishment in Pakistan, that India is an existential threat, right? How do you counter that?
Well, basically you change the narrative, essentially, and my book, for example, is one of the means of doing it. Eventually, more and more people in Pakistan will get to know the truth. In the modern era, keeping a false narrative alive is no longer as easy and sustainable. There was a time, for example, when Pakistan had only one radio station and one television channel. And on the 16th of December 1971, the day the surrender ceremony was being organized in Dhaka, the headline of Pakistan's most important English language newspaper, Dawn, was "Victory on all fronts." So that was possible then. It's not possible now. People in Pakistan will watch this, even though this is an Indian show. People in Pakistan watch what happens on Indian television channels, and therefore, or American or German or British. So facts will slowly come out. What we are seeing are the last gasps of an establishment that has kept Pakistan under its heels, but they can't do that forever. Again, it's not tomorrow. It's not day after tomorrow. I'm not talking in months or years. I'm talking about the force of history and the direction things are moving.
But since you mentioned, it's a multipolar, connected world, and people have access to information in each other's countries. They're not dependent on government propaganda. Doesn't that also make life difficult in a sense? I mean, look at the hyper-nationalism, for example, that you see on television or on Twitter.
On both sides.
On both sides. Doesn't that make it difficult for governments to closely engage with each other?
Well, I don't think that this problem is, in case of India and Pakistan, the issue is ever going to be resolved just by government-to-government engagement. I think that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and Prime Minister Modi both had good intentions. I think that Prime Minister Gilani and President Asif Zardari and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had good intentions. But there is a deeper dynamic that has rendered peacemaking very difficult between the two countries. Each time, I mean, look, I'll give you an example. In my book, I make a revelation. It's not a revelation. I shed light on something that as far back as 1959, Pakistan's first military ruler, General Ayub Khan, had acknowledged that a plebiscite in Kashmir may not be possible. This is 2 years after the last plebiscite resolution. But in Pakistan, people are told that,
this is
plebiscite has to take place, plebiscite is what we demand. Pakistan, having conceded it as early as 59, that it's not necessary, the last UN resolution having been in 57. People in Pakistan are not told that in 1957 we had a majority of the United Nations with us. Today, we don't.
Probably don't.
In fact, last year when Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif talked about Kashmir at the United Nations General Assembly, 193 heads of state and government spoke about international affairs. He was the only one to talk about Kashmir. So we didn't even have somebody to second a resolution if we wanted one. Forget about having majority support. Those realities cannot be kept from the people of Pakistan forever. So slowly an awakening will occur. Secondly, terrorism is going to make Pakistanis wake up even more strongly than they have someday. And I'll explain that to you. The consequences of terrorism for Pakistan have been very significant. 35 years ago, Pakistan's per capita GDP was much higher than India's per capita GDP.
Yes, it was.
Today, it is much less than India's per capita GDP.
And you think that's a large reason for that is because of terrorism?
I'll come to it. Pakistanis are able to travel to less and less countries without visas.
Yeah.
You know, we are next only to Afghanistan and Iraq. North Korean passport holders can travel to more countries without visas than Pakistanis. Now, what has changed in the last 30 years? The most significant factor in the last 30 years in Pakistan has been Pakistan's involvement in terrorism. And so therefore, we have to make this argument, and more, the more this argument is made, the less support there will be for jihadi groups and terrorism. Now, will they be able to continue to intimidate people? Will people like me think twice about going back to the country? Because, you know, even though there's no legal reason for me not to go back, my fear is, what if I'm disposed of like Salman Taseer was eliminated? Maybe, you know, I have a few books to write, and experience tells me that it helps to be alive to be able to write a book. Dead men don't write very good books. So therefore, or don't write books at all. So therefore, those factors will all be there. But it's a complex reality. I just feel that while it's not something that is likely to happen immediately, when it does happen, it's going to be a very quick process, a bit like the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Wow, okay, it's interesting. Those are very strong comparisons. I want to talk a little bit about the country that you've been living in for the last many years now, and this extraordinary election cycle that we are seeing in the United States. But what do you think of Trump and this whole rhetoric of him?
Well, I could give the short answer. I don't think much of him.
You don't think much?
I personally think that basically he is an anger candidate. He's tapped into the anger of especially white working class men of the United States. Also, he's I'm not too keen on reality television, and I personally think that people need to go back to an era when reading mattered. This era of images and constant entertainment and news and entertainment being subsidiaries of one another is not good.
But some of his rhetoric about keeping Muslims out.
We will come to that. And he is essentially a product of reality television. Now, as far as his rhetoric is concerned, he has actually, what he does is he says shocking things. He walks back a little bit. But by saying those shocking things, he taps into whoever is worried about it. So a bit, by the way, some of it happens in India. Some of it is happening in Pakistan. It's happening in every democracy. You know, you try to reduce complex issues to something simple, appeal to people's sentiments. And he's appealing to the sentiments of white men in America who feel they had a good life until the immigrants came and things have changed, and it's not like the good old days anymore. Some of them are angry about cultural changes, but above all, they do not have the economic comfort in proportional terms that they had 15, 20 years. Yeah.
You think he'll win?
I'm not in the business of predicting elections. It's not something I do very well. But if he wins, he will probably be a one-term president. Okay. He will probably be a tremendous disaster. And the American public is going to then have to reevaluate him. In any case, America's demographics have changed significantly. Ronald Reagan got 54% of the white vote and had a landslide in 1984. At that time, America's minority population, including blacks, was only 12%. Mitt Romney got 59% of the white vote, and he still couldn't get elected when America's minority proportion of the electorate had gone up to 26%. So a solid chunk of the minorities plus a minority of the white vote enabled Barack Obama to win in 2012. I don't see how that changes when the non-white proportion of the American electorate has gone up to 30% this time. How much of the white vote can Trump get? And then Donald does not do well with women either.
Oh, absolutely. He said some pretty disparaging things about women.
So demographics are against him. Yes, good campaigning matters, etc. But the problem with having a motor mouth is that you talk too much. And the more you talk, the more you put your foot in your mouth.
I'm getting a lot of comments and questions on Kashmir and what's happened recently in Kashmir, on both sides actually. What's happened here in Jammu and Kashmir and what's happened on the other side. Do you think the stage has come for both India and Pakistan to have a realistic conversation to their respective Kashmirs?
Well, first of all, let's understand the situation in Kashmir. The people of Kashmir have been the biggest losers in this football that the two countries have played, using them as the football. India has a serious problem with the alienation of people in the Kashmir Valley. Then democratic politics means that the people of you can a party can get votes in Jammu and then form a coalition with a party that gets the vote in Kashmir, which is what has happened. And in that, I mean, when you start having endless debates about where should be the Jammu and Kashmir state IIT, should it be in Jammu or should it be in Kashmir, it causes unrest. So you have a serious problem of alienation in the territory India controls. On the Pakistani side, a significant chunk, Gilgit-Baltistan, does not even or did not have any representation until recently. Their legal status is like in limbo. Then there is Azad Kashmir, which is a very small strip of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. And there were recent elections there, and the outcome of that election is also being contested on that side. My own view is that the more I have studied resolution of conflicts between nations, I have found that countries that have done best have been the ones who have tried to normalize relations between themselves first and attended to disputes later. To keep Kashmir as the focus of dispute has resulted in great suffering of the Kashmiri people on both sides. More so perhaps on the Indian side, huge militarization, and militarization is never good. So there will always be human rights violations when there is large scale militarization. So there are human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir under Indian control. But the fact that it's Pakistan that keeps pushing and saying that this is a dispute, and we can't have normal relations without resolving the dispute, needs to be addressed. China and Taiwan. China thinks Taiwan belongs to China. Taiwan, for a long time, acted as if it was the legitimate government of China and kept the UN seat until 1974. And then China decided our economic need and our need for modernization requires us to normalize with the United States. Part of the agreement with the United States was that China will not use force against Taiwan. And China hasn't done that. What have they done? Now the Taiwanese invest in China, the Chinese invest in Taiwan, they have invested in each other, they trade a lot, it's several $1 billion of trade between the two, they move back and forth, and there is calm. Why can't we adopt a model like that? Why do we have to be so desi that we want to have the argument first and the relationship later?
So let me paraphrase that. In a sense, you're saying that the only realistic solution to the Kashmir dispute is what was attempted by Manmohan Singh and General Musharraf.
By the way, if you read my book, and I urge everybody who's watching to actually pay for it and buy it and read it, it's called India versus Pakistan. Why can't we just be friends? If you read it, actually I point out that the Manmohan-Musharraf agreement is more or less the same that was discussed between Soren Singh and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in 1963 and between President Eisenhower and Ayub Khan in 1959. So essentially the contours of the agreement have existed since 1959. It's all a question of signing on the dotted line. And why won't anybody sign on the dotted line when both sides know what the solution is? It's a question for people to think about. Look, Pakistanis feel strongly about the mistreatment of the people of Kashmir. Fair enough. But do we want Kashmir to become the South Asian Palestine, where the sheer dynamic of force makes it impossible for an intifada to succeed? But every few years an intifada is orchestrated. And the Palestinians are getting nothing out of it. If they had accepted a Palestinian state a few years ago, by now that state would have created something for the people. So my view is that the solution to Jammu and Kashmir cannot be based on a zero-sum game. By any negotiation involves give and take. If one side says 100%, then there will be no solution. So I think that, and more important, a dispute that hasn't been resolved in 69 years, if it's not resolved for another 69 weeks or another 69 months or another 69 years, it's not going to make such a big difference. Okay. The real question is, can we think about the people?
Okay. Last couple of questions about, you've been living in the US for some years now. Do you ever feel, or do you ever think you'd be able to go back to Pakistan?
Yeah. I think about going back to Pakistan, but I will go back to a Pakistan where Hafiz Saeed will be in prison, and I will be able to roam around freely and talk about my vision for Pakistan like he does of his vision. Look, eventually everybody wants to go back home, and Pakistan is home for me. I was born in Pakistan. I'm somebody who my critique of Pakistan as an ideological state is based on the idea that those of us who were born in Pakistan do not need an ideology to be Pakistani. We were born Pakistani. Those who were born as Indians before 1947, they may need arguments for why they decided to create Pakistan. We don't need that. We are already there. So I'm happy, but I won't go back to be assassinated. That's at least not my intent. And if I can't go back, I'm a little resigned to it.
So does it worry you? I mean, you're from Karachi. I mean, you lived there, you worked there, you studied there. What happened to Amjad Sabri, for example, a few weeks ago?
Amjad Sabri, but look, I'm from Karachi, and the list of people who've been eliminated in Karachi who are personal friends. Amjad Sabri, actually, I attended his Qawwali in Washington, D.C. only a few months ago, and he had promised that next time he'll come and do a Qawwali at my home. And now he won't come, I consider him a friend. There are many others in Karachi who've been eliminated, people that I knew as a child, or people I knew as a younger person, people who were at college with me. And therefore, the perception of threat is not just something I've created in my head, it's very real. One can get killed there because of one's religious views, one can get killed there because of one's political views. In my case, I've been branded a traitor, so some idiot might decide to say, okay, I'm disposing of the traitor, and then somebody might say his vision of Islam, which is pluralist. I mean, I say that it doesn't matter which version of Islam somebody is following, the state has no business defining and determining who is or is not a Muslim. That alone could be basis for somebody to try and eliminate me. And people like you always make sure that I'm in the news, so that kind of makes it very difficult for me to be an anonymous person who quietly goes about his business in Karachi.
You're in public life, Ambassador Haqqani. Thank you very much, though. Fascinating conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for taking time out and speaking to News 18. I hope you have a good time in India.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.